Welcome to Name 3 Songs. I'm Sarah Fagan.
I'm Jenna Million, and this is a podcast where we discuss feminist issues in music and pop culture, all while empowering fans.
Because let's be honest, fangirls knew about that band way before you did.
Today's
episode is really
exciting episode.
And it really kind of is in defense of the fangirl, because the fangirl is not gender exclusive at all.
And we're talking about some hardcore girly pops, aka Turnstile.
Some cunty hardcore music. I love it so much. I love a hardcore band that can maybe twerk too.
As you listen to this episode, you will see me and Sarah become more in love with Turnstile. Today we are here to defend Turnstile's honor because a lot of people have come out saying they're not hardcore. They've come out saying, oh, you're a sellout. And we're here to break it down and say that's a load of bullshit.
And also that selling out isn't even a real thing anymore.
No.
Nor was it ever really. So we're looking into like the history of what sellout culture is and how many incredible bands have been referred to as sellouts, which is a lot, and the different ways in which they were and why. And then how really at the end of the day, everybody saying that Turnstile are sellouts are just people who simply don't understand art.
Yes.
So I cannot wait to fight people in the YouTube comments.
So we have a big, exciting, juicy episode for you today. But with all that, let's get into our fangirl nonsense.
Fuck yeah.
I feel like, should I go first today because my nonsense is on brand?
I don't know. I feel like maybe you should go last so that way we can just lean
all the way in.
Lean all the way in.
Take it away, Sarah Fagan.
Okay, so my fangirl nonsense is, I think, something that most of us can relate to is that we are having one of my personal favorite recession indicators, which is that British men are back in style.
Why is this a recession indicator?
Because British men were like, I'm just like Alex Turner, like McFly into the busted, tweet culture, and tweet culture coming back, and like why we were all so obsessed with One Direction was because it was like at the end of the tweet culture, and so we were all just like, not yet, in like 2 years. Okay, like once we've like once we beat fascism, we get a boy band as a treat.
Really get better.
Yeah.
Okay,
but yeah, so I think that literally, because it's also like the clothing culture is coming back. And so, like,
tight pants.
It makes sense. Oh, don't want that. So, like, the next thing... Well, okay. So, first thing that was clear is Olivia Rodrigo and Louis Partridge.
Okay.
And she has that song that She's So American. And it's about how she's like, oh my god, I love my British boyfriend. He doesn't understand, like, the silly things that I say that are American. And, like, we make fun of each other because we have different languages, but it's the same language, whatever. And then at Glasgow this weekend, her, like, speech before she played the song was like, yeah, I was, like, writing this song while I was, like, falling in love with this British guy. And, like, she's, like, in this filled with, like, all these inside jokes about, like, our language barriers and, like, how I pronounce, like, Glastonbury is a berry and, like, you guys say it, like, Glastonbury, like, whatever. I can't do a British accent. And so it's, like, that whole thing. And it's very cute and wholesome. But then today, or maybe yesterday, I saw the trailer for a new Netflix movie called My Oxford Year, which is apparently based off of a book that was written in like 2014. So at the end of the recession British obsession that Americans had, which was being written while we were all like super obsessed with British people. And it's about an American girl who goes to Oxford to study. I haven't read the book. I read the spoilers on Reddit because I had to know what was going on, because in the trailer I was like, something fishy is going on here, and I was correct. I hate when I'm right.
Okay, I was gonna say I don't want it if it's not Nicholas Galitzine, but if we have more White Men of the Month, British White Men of the Month, sure, bring it on.
No, literally. And so in the movie, she's like a older student, so I assume she's like in her master's degree or like a PhD or something along those lines. But literally, it's like she has a love affair with her teacher, and that's like told to you in the trailer. So I'm not spoiling anything. Don't worry. But like the whole thing is just like, oh, like I was only supposed to come here for a year, but now I've fallen in love with this troubled British man. And I just think that is every girl who's studying abroad in England's dream. Yeah. Is that a British man will fall in love with her, and then that's her life, and then she can like stop wearing the Union Jack shirts that she bought at Hot Topic in 2009. Like, I mean, or a One Direction pop-up shop.
I'm mostly fascinated in like, okay, number one, what is going to come out of this? You know, because we have one. Is this a Netflix movie or what is it?
Yeah, it's like I think it's a Netflix movie.
Okay. Usually, one Netflix series breeds another.
Yeah,
where
we already have
these
like we've already had like more British love interest like coming into the lexicon of culture.
Isn't the idea of you? Isn't he British in the idea of you?
Yeah.
Okay. There we go.
And so again, it's like these things where, but this specifically, like the whole like, oh, she's like a student and she's like going to study in England and like, oh my god, her like teacher falls, and like that's like every Wattpad written by an older person about One Direction was literally like, oh, like Harry Styles is my teacher. And then like a teenager writes one and it's like, oh, Harry Styles is a mafia boss who bought me from my mom.
I will take your word on it. I will say I've never gone that far, and I will take your word on it.
Well, they've done it with every band ever. Like, for me, it was like McFly.
But we're talking about movies, but like boy bands? Is there a boy band in our future?
I feel like that could come full circle.
I know.
You know?
We have boy bands era. We have to have a break.
Yeah.
Boy bands always.
Well, because but I guess the thing is though is that like One Direction kind of proved that it was like a fluke a little bit because like. There were nobody else had anywhere near as much success as they did.
BTS, but different story.
Yeah, it's different because it's like there's a whole universe around that, like outside of it.
And but I just Western culture.
But I just mean like in Western culture, it's like there were other boy bands that copied them, like Union J or like the Wanted. Like they kept trying to push the Wanted in America. The Wanted had like a reality TV show here, but it's like it just wasn't
the Wanted
translating. It just like wasn't translating. And so my thing is it's like I'm not against another Western British boy band coming around, but like, do we have time for it?
2 years.
Who knows? We'll see.
Once the economy gets worse and we need hope, then they'll appear.
Listen, we'll send a note to Zora and be like, hello.
What are you doing for the boy band agenda?
What's your boy band agenda?
There we go.
So that's my fangirl nonsense. I think it's so silly because no matter how much I try, I will always gravitate to a man who looks like he's British.
There you go. It's in our DNA. Different for me, but leading into today's discussion, we are talking about Turnstile, which is very exciting. I will admit that I am a new Turnstile fan.
Oh
yes.
No, gosh.
Oh, am I part of the sellout culture? They sold out to me personally. So Turnstile always existed in my peripherals, but I just thought they were like a heavy hardcore band, and I was like,
but they've always been cunty.
Okay. Well, so this album cycle, I will say the advertising got to me because I heard some of the singles and I was like very invested. I had listened to Glow On. So like I went back and like listened again. I was like, oh, I know a lot of these songs. Yeah. But they were performing in New York under the K Bridge, which is a venue. Well, it used to just be a highway under the bridge where people did DIY pop-ups. And then the city was like, can't be having that. So now they're making big dollars off of it. Anyways, this was like the night their album is coming out. They had done a show in Baltimore and like I think a few other cities, and the videos from it are like crazy. Like if y'all saw like some of the viral videos were like these little kids like on the stage, then like jumping into the crowd and going back. Like it's so wholesome.
No, I love it.
But I'd seen all these videos.
Hardcore's for everyone.
Exactly. And I was like, I need to see this. Like, yes, I'm a relatively new fan of Turnstile, but I'm like, this feels so monumental with the history that they've had. And I saw like the interviews that have been coming out that they've been doing. And I'm like, this era feels like really big, like really different for them. And also, I was given so many Instagram ads, and I clicked on that ticket link so many times. Like, this girl's gonna fucking buy a ticket if we just like keep
pushing her. Like, she
I finally gave in. I spent $100.
It seemed like it was worth it. It seemed like it was worth every cent.
Ticket prices at certain times, like it was $25 when I looked previously. I don't know how it went.
When I had looked, it was like $160. So
they're trying to sell more, like right at the end.
Yeah.
So it was $100, and then I went with one of my friends, and also like I wanted to go to this venue because it's like I'm relatively new to New York. I'm still like seeing all this stuff, and like it was their album release night, so I was like, this is gonna be fucking crazy. So I went with one of my friends, and it was fucking crazy. We like tried to push up into the crowd for them, obviously, and I think like going into this there was already the conversation of like, they're not hardcore anymore. Like, they're selling out. Like, what is the audience even gonna be like? Let me tell you, that was a fucking hardcore show. Like, that was the energy was hardcore show. And so me and my friend in the crowd, and we're both like, we like to be in like a little mosh pit. We like to be in a push pit. I'm not trying to have elbows swung in my face.
Well, this is the thing of like,
I'm ready to dip if it's like a fucking actual hardcore pit.
Yeah.
But if we can like have a little fun, like I'm down.
Yeah.
And so once the band went on, it was, and this is like, I don't even know what the capacity is. It's probably like 8,000 or something like that. Like it's a big ass.
Yeah,
space.
I feel like spaces like that, the capacities of a fit is a fake thing.
I don't know if it's 10. Yeah, I don't know if it's 10K, but it's definitely more than 5. And it was just like the crowd was like the surgence of like everyone like rushing to get to the middle, and people getting basically the first 3 songs were just like a whirlpool of like the crowd figuring itself out so that like multiple mosh pits could open.
Yeah.
And then the people who don't want to mosh need to like find their little space. So that was me and my friend, and we literally were like holding on to each other for dear life because I'm like, I'm gonna fucking lose her in the crowd. Like this is the end. And so we ended up honestly like way further back in the crowd, just because also it was like summer, sweaty as fuck. I was like, you know what, fuck it, like we can have a good time in the back. And it was such a good show. Like all the first part of the set was their old stuff before they started playing more of the album, and then like the hits and everything from Glow On. But they had like these big LED screens, and they had visuals to go with it, and the visuals were super cool. It wasn't just like a steady cam of like the members, like like they had multiple people on camera all around the venue, and then they were like crossfading the images. So it was like the crowd over like, and then people were like, you know, like when you think of like going to like an EDM festival and people were like doing like hula hoops with lights. It wasn't exactly that, but there were some people doing weird shit in the crowd, and so then they had like the camera on like this dude who's like throwing a sign, like I don't even know, and then like I don't know, it was just like very cool and like artful, and a lot like imagery used from the movie and stuff like that. It was an experience. Like the whole thing top to bottom was such an experience. And let me tell you, everyone who's mad about Turnstile sold out, I'm like, no one was mad at that show. No one was mad.
Like, people like to have opinions on the internet. That's the thing.
And you know what? I bet those fucking people also are still going to the show.
Yeah.
They're still not.
No, of course. But like this is the thing, like where you're saying also of like, oh, like I like a push pit, and it's like push pits and mosh pits are different, as you know, and so it's like these things where like even like when I went to see Fontaine's DC, like there were a lot of people in the crowd that clearly had just like never experienced like.
But it's funny because
a
like,
mosh
this
pit
was like the hardcore dudes were like, no, we're opening up the pit if you're gonna be here at our show.
Yeah, because it's a community and a scene, and it's a culture,
exactly.
And I think that that's what's so cool. And what's been so cool, like reading about Turnstile, of like getting to understand like that the band just as much is part of that culture, because I feel like it's the thing where like in a lot of the scenes that we've been part of, like the bands will be like, I don't listen to pop punk, I just make pop punk music, like shit like that. And it's like, you're not better than me because you don't listen to the type of music that your band makes, like be so for real. But it's like they're so heavy on like, oh, the culture. And I'm like, yes, that's what's so important about it, because it's also like a welcoming thing where you were saying like the show in Baltimore, the free show where there's these kids, it's like the crowd's protecting these kids, the crowd's like egging them on, whatever. Like when they like crowd surfed and then they went back on the stage, they're not like, that's, you're doing it wrong. They're just like, you're doing it right because it's what you feel is right in your soul, kind of thing.
So
and it's like they're there. Like there's a quote in one of the articles where one of the guys in Turnstile was like, oh, sometimes you go to a gig because you want to get punched in the face. And it's like this thing where it's like, if that's what you want, that can happen. But also if it's not what you want, you will be protected, because that's the whole point. Is it's like, I've been having these like conversations with friends recently about how I get frustrated at gigs because so many of the shows that I'm going to, I'm like, oh my God, this is like a mosh band. And sometimes nobody's moshing. And then sometimes when there is a mosh pit, it's like whoever decides that they're in charge of the mosh pit has clearly never moshed before. And so they'll do that thing where they like open the pit up, and I'm like, okay, and then the beat drops and they don't run in, and I'm just like,
where did you learn this?
I'm like, what is happening? I'm like, you watched a video on YouTube and didn't understand the premise, and I'm like, no, you like hold hands with somebody, you spin in a circle, you open the pit, then you get everybody to run around. I'm like, you have to figure out what like style of mosh pit this is. But I was like, whatever you're doing is wrong. And so it's just like this thing where hardcore, it seems like, has somehow been able to keep the semblance of the culture even through the COVID idiots, like not knowing what concert etiquette is, because they're like, enough of us have been in charge. Like
dudes are gonna be hardcore dudes.
We can continue to be in charge.
They're
and like
gonna be 35 and fucking jumping off stage and hitting their head.
But they are gonna be. They're gonna be in the pit, and if you look lost and confused, they're gonna be like, "Do you want to leave, or do you want me to teach you how to do this?"
Exactly.
It's like very welcoming you into the culture.
Being community.
Yeah. And so that's what I think is
It's
so
always been
beautiful
for each other,
about the whole thing,
community.
and so fucking
Yeah.
funny about the whole sellout conversation that's been happening. Because I'm like, literally the point of hardcore music was that you guys had nowhere to belong, and then you made this music, and then you found this culture, and then you like created community around it, and now you're just like, well, it's like a little too cunty for me. Like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like just moving into today's like whole discussion, like everything I've been saying is they've been getting is this even hardcore allegations? Is this album a sellout? Like from Time and Space to Glow On was such a big difference.
Yeah.
Both in like the visual era and just like in the style of the album. And so I think people were expecting them to copy and paste that jump between Glow On and Never Enough. And instead it was an extension of the Glow On universe, just expanding into that sound. So there's already other allegations of like kind of sellout conversation around Glow On. So I think everyone was like expecting that going into this album.
Like I get it, but also it's like I spent the past 2 weeks knowing that we're doing this episode, and I've been listening to every Turnstile album. And it's like I've been aware of Turnstile for a long time. They've been in my periphery because I like hardcore sounding music and I don't like screaming. And so I was always like, this is cool. But I was never like a big fan. And so listening to all their albums, it's like the fact that they're from Baltimore is so clear to me in their music by how much even the first 2 albums have like R&B sounds and like those kind of like even like kind of jazz vibes sometimes, where I'm just like listening to this and I'm like, how did people not expect that they were going to keep learning about other music genres and like expanding on their music? I just found it really interesting. But it's also interesting to me because I feel like the last time that I've really witnessed sellout culture discourse really heavily was like maybe 2012, but I feel like 2010, kind of around that time.
Yeah.
And I feel like as consumerism and the internet and social media became bigger, it was like kind of expected that these bands were going to have to be selling themselves because like MTV and all these things like weren't options anymore. And it's like, get your music heard.
Even like in the indie bubble itself, like there was I don't even know if these bands got accused of selling out, but it was like there was a huge boom of like the late 2000s indie sphere that was like they're all getting commercial placements.
Yeah.
And so like that,
like
like
iPod also, commercials, like all that stuff.
Exactly.
And it started
like,
to become more normal. Yeah.
But I think like there was a shift because like into the later half of the 2010s till now, there was less of an emphasis on bands, more an emphasis on solo artists, and so I feel like the conversation almost switched to be industry plants.
And true.
And then
interesting point.
Now it's like swinging back with Turnstile.
Yeah. It's just like interesting because I feel like with the internet, the idea of selling out feels so not real to me.
Also
because I'm like, everything is so much more accessible than it ever was before. So the likelihood of like people that aren't part of your community, aren't part of your scene, finding something because of like how many social platforms there are.
Yeah.
Because like even when I think about like MySpace, it was like MySpace was for a very specific community of people, really.
Yeah.
And they would always gravitate to those same type of like music. And so it's like the communities and cultures that they were a part of in the outside world, they were also a part of in the MySpace world.
Right.
And you didn't really like leave that bubble that much. And so it's interesting now that the internet is so much more like, we're going to feed you things based off of what you're reacting to. Whereas like MySpace was just like, I had to like
seek it out.
Seek it out.
So
that's
community.
Yeah, that's why there was still community. And that's why it was still, you can be like, oh, you're selling out. You're trying to get these people that like are outside of our culture and community, whatever.
Could you argue that by being on TikTok, you're selling out?
No, literally. Every single one of us.
You actually could have that argument.
Yeah. And so it's just interesting, like thinking about this like bigger idea of it, because it's like, guys, like it's just like Hayley Williams has been like rocking Turnstile merch for like a decade.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh no. But that's the thing too, is like they're also genre bending and defying.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's like a camaraderie of things where it's like you can hear those sounds in the music even from early on, where it's like, okay, like there's more interest in like other genres, other things. But I just think like, again, it's like the sellout conversation really hasn't been happening for the last like 10 to 15 years. Yeah. And so there are probably people like online who are just like, I know what this means.
Yeah, fair. I mean, so for us growing up, I think a lot of it is like calling back to like Nirvana was like big time, like got the sellout accusation. But I did find an article in Slate by Franz Nicolay, and it's called The Rise and Decline of Sellout. And he breaks down like what this terminology means, and a lot of it overlapped with like political terminology, like socioeconomic stuff, but like dated back to like the 1800s, like quite literally in terms of like when the word originated. But in terms of music, like this has been going on longer than I knew it, which makes sense with like I think Metallica was like big time. They got Sellout. Because in my brain, it was always like, oh, the 90s. The 90s is when Sellout was happening because of like internet boom. But really, like this article was fascinating because it went all the way back to the 1950s. And like originally there was conversations around like musicians that had Black audiences, like gospel and jazz. And they were called sellouts if they were perceived to being tailoring their audience to more of a white audience. But then there was also like Bob Dylan, and when he went electric, there was the folk purists who called him a sellout because he was doing folk rock, and they were like, but it's interesting because it's like gatekeeping community. You're not doing straight folk anymore. You're doing folk rock. This is something different. This is not part of our community.
Well, I think also it's like in those eras, it's like, I mean, even still now, but especially in those eras, it's like people, like we were saying, it's like people were seeking out like-minded people, and they're like, okay, I know if I go into this space, like, there's going to be people, community, who care about like the civil rights movement, or care about like whatever kind of thing, or like homeless people, whatever. It's like care about all of these like political topics, and music went so hand in hand with politics. Which is also why I think it's so interesting, like this is a separate conversation, but like so interesting when people get mad that musicians are being political, because it's like music and politics and culture like have always been so intertwined. And it's like, but specific genres were so tied with like certain political ideologies. And so it's like, people were seeking out folk music. And it's like, if you move into folk rock, it's like rock music starts to get into like this other space of things where it's like, oh, instead of like doing weed, you're doing coke, or like, no, but literally it's like a different monetary means, and like all these different things of like what the culture is about, and like what the vibe is of like, okay, like we're all here to be like chill, or like we're all here for this.
So also for context in terms of Bob Dylan for this conversation, the Beatles made their debut on the Ed Sullivan Show in 1964. So we had Elvis, like in terms of rock and roll being commercial. We had Elvis, and like obviously there's a lot of, and like we've done episodes in the history of like rock music really coming from Black artists, and then Elvis kind of stealing it. And but anyways, but for context, the Beatles, 1964. The year that Bob Dylan went electric, and this is when he got these accusations, was 1965. So it's like contextually what was happening was the Beatles are blowing up. They're this massive thing. It's basically a boy bandification. And you have someone like Bob Dylan who's in a community that's protected, where people have sought out this ideology and like sought out this both self-expression and ideological expression, beliefs, etc. Suddenly doing something that a boy band is doing, like the Beatles are doing. So it's like, to contextualize it, that would be crazy at the time.
No, definitely. And I feel like that's what's so interesting about all this too, is it's like in the like 90s when record labels had so much money, because again, it's like we're having more TV, we're having more access, all of this stuff. And it's like, you read any book about like any band that got big in like the 90s or like early 2000s, and it's like these labels were throwing money at them. They were just like, we're going to get you private jets. Like, you're going to have every meal at Peter Luger. You're going to go to steakhouses in every city. Like, we're going to get you so much cocaine. You want prostitutes, we'll get you prostitutes. Like, we'll spend money on whatever you want. Because it's like, these label guys want to live a rock star lifestyle, and they want to like, whatever. There was just so much money that they had access to. And so it's like bands like Green Day, bands like Blink-182, like all these sorts of bands also were experiencing their communities calling them sellouts and being like, hey, like, what the fuck are you guys doing?
Part of this conversation was tied to authenticity. And in this article, they talk about in the 1990s, the idealists of the rock underground went mainstream. The sellout got a second wind again. There was a parallel rise of a hip hop world sensitive about authenticity. The culture swelled with discussions of selling out, who did, who didn't, who never would. One quote that was like, L7 remains too rowdy to ever be a sellout. There's another quote that a sellout is someone who does shit they can't fucking stand doing just to make money. So it's like the version of selling out has meant different things at different times to different generations. Because it's like, does it mean expanding the sound beyond this like kind of coveted community? Does it mean selling your soul and taking money.
Yeah.
Does it mean, but I think the like selling your soul and taking money thing, like doing shit you can't stand just for money, is what a lot of people kind of latch onto. But it's like,
and they make, well, it's like an assumption. It's like, yeah.
And we take this to the current age as a band like Turnstile. Are they selling their souls to earn money? And the answer is largely no. And like into the 2010s era of this whole thing, the answer is largely no.
Because also, like, my qualm with the idea of like being so mad that a band is being successful is it's like, this is your favorite band, and your favorite band are doing well enough now that the production can be higher quality, that they have time to like write good music, and nothing's rushed, and they can like tour more often and all these things because they don't have to like go work at Google. They don't have to like go work at Trader Joe's. They don't have to go be a barista. It's like, for me, I feel like it's jarring, like, sometimes the size of artists, like, that you will see working at, like, a public space.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, what are you doing? What are you doing here?
Yeah.
Like, why are you working at Foot Locker? But it's just, like, these ideas of that where it's like, oh, like, what do you mean you still have other jobs? And it's like, most of them have to, and then you're mad when they don't anymore.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
You know? And so it's just interesting with that idea of things, too.
I mean, Kurt Cobain even talked about this because they got accusations. He said, I don't blame the average 17-year-old punk rock kid for calling me a sellout. I understand that. And maybe when they grow up a little bit, they'll realize there's more to life than living out your rock and roll identity so righteously.
But I think it's also this idea of like, like when you're a teenager, it's like you don't know what like getting older means. Like you don't understand. You have no.
So like why would I
understanding
anything else? Why would I ever like give up this identity?
Yeah.
So because at that point in time, it's so strong within you.
Yeah. But it's also just like
wait, hold on.
What?
This is basically okay, Loki. I'm about to cook.
Okay.
This is basically, you know, the entire Brat episode we did is it's like every generation looks at the people who are 10, 15, 20 years older than them and see, oh, when I'm 30, I'm supposed to have a house, I'm supposed to be married, I'm supposed to have a kid. And then you're like, I'm never going to be like that. Like, I can't even relate to that.
Yeah.
And then, like, that generation gets to that age, and we're like, well, shit, like, we're not even in the same economic position to be able to do these things.
Yeah.
The same way, like, we talked about with Brat, like, her album was so resonant because she's in her early 30s, and everyone is feeling the same. It's like, we're not doing these same things. Like, we're not in the same position to even think about doing these things. Yeah. Or, like, if you are, like, you really have to prioritize that.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like every generation has experiences. And so we're talking about like the 17-year-old kid. They're like, I could never be like that when I'm 30. And then you get to 30 and perspective's a lot different.
Yeah.
Also, given the economic standpoint and political standpoint, things are like it's never going to be the same by the time you get to 30.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting. But also the thing that I find so interesting, especially with like the Nirvana selling out thing, is it's like Kurt Cobain himself was such like a voice for the voiceless.
Yeah, true.
And to me, it's like, yeah, I get that you don't want to share him. You don't want to share this experience that you're having. But also at the same time, it's like, how are things ever going to get better if the general public don't have access to these voices, don't have access to these stories, whatever. And so I think that was really interesting too, because I found this article that was like a book review. So it's like an LA Times article written by Jim Rudland. That's a review of this book that is called Sellout, the major label feeding frenzy that swept punk, emo, and hardcore from 1994 to 2007. And the book talks a lot about Green Day. And this is what I find interesting too, because still to this day, like Green Day are like they've always been like a punk band, and like they've definitely like leaned more pop, and like they've become more accessible. I mean, they fucking made like a rock opera that turned into a Broadway show. Like, let's be so real. But that rock opera that turned into a Broadway show was like the most political message Broadway show I've ever seen. And I love, like, maybe like whatever. There's a couple of very political Broadway shows, but like this one was just like so general public accessible compared to like most musical theater. And it was about the response to 9/11. And so it's like, and I mean, that's what the album's about, but like seeing that visualized of every single song being visualized into a show that's telling a story. And it's like this message of like, oh, this was fucked up. Like what happened? Like it was then being told to this whole audience, this whole new thing. And it's like, people are going to be mad. Like, I understand, because like I've been there. I've been mad when like Fall Out Boy got popular. I was mad when All Time Low got popular. Like, we've all been there. We've all had these experiences of our own bands being like, this was my thing. But like when you think about it in the bigger picture of something, it's like Green Day now still to this day performing American Idiot and changing the lyrics to be about Donald Trump.
Fucking iconic.
And it's like, oh, like this is important and necessary. And it's good that the general public has access to this band because it's like, oh, like I love all these songs, but like my parents believe in Donald Trump or like whatever. And then you get more access to other trains of thought.
For teenagers where it's like that, their first exposure might be to Green Day after Green Day is quote unquote sold out. And then they're like, wait, this ideology really speaks to me. What rabbit hole do they go down to become part of a community, to then start their own band, to then make their own art?
Yeah.
And it's like, that was just the entryway.
Yeah. But it's also interesting because what the reviewer said in this story was that, like, what they were least surprised about in the book was, like, the bands who were, like, aware of the conversation around selling out. And they're just like, that's not a real thing. So we're just going to, like, lean into it because we want to be successful and, like, have fun and do whatever. And so he said that the boys in Blink-182 were wannabe rock stars who happened to play poppy punk rock. And they just did not care about being called sellouts because they're like,
that's what feels on brand for them.
Yeah. But then he goes, but Jawbreaker, who repeatedly assured its fans that they would never sell out and agonized over the decision, was practically pillared for signing a deal with a record label. And now Jawbreaker doesn't have, like, never hit big time. The band broke up. Like, nothing happened because they were, like, so afraid of disappointing their fans that they didn't, like, let the label push them in the way that they should. And so I just think that things like that are really interesting because another point that was made in the book is that another way that bands kind of like skated past being called sellouts was being from a smaller town.
Yeah.
And so he was saying how Jimmy Eat World are from Mesa, Arizona, and they faced like a much weaker backlash about being sellouts because it's like there was a really local scene in Arizona that was concerned, but outside of that, they didn't really care. And then the thing is that Jimmy Eat World always would play Mesa, Arizona. Like, they would always come back to the community. And I think that also comes back to the Turnstile of it all as well, because they're just like,
so much.
We're from Baltimore, like, we still live there. Like, we're not leaving. We're not going to, like, take these opportunities.
We were talking about was a fundraiser also. The free show they did.
The free show was
this album was a fundraiser for, like, local community.
Yeah. And so it's like, they have always just been like they even said, like, in a lot of the interviews, but like the Pitchfork one is the one that we're going to be like calling back to a lot during this discussion. But it's like they're like, yeah, like in our music videos, we're like hiring our friends that we know from Baltimore, like we're featuring these venues that we've been playing at for over a decade. Like the people who exist in those venues are like part of this, and like that's the point.
To like the place you grew up, the culture you grew up in, the community you grew up in, and like feeding it to help sustain itself and to help younger people come up and still be able to have that experience. Like that's what it's about.
Yeah. And like that's the thing that is so funny to me is it's like it's the same thing where it's like in New York right now there's such this huge fucking conversation about transplants and like everybody being mad about this. No, but it's relevant because it's the same thing where it's like if you're giving back to the community, if you're coming into a space because you're like, I want to live in New York because what New York has to offer and the fact that there's community and the fact that there's people with culture and there's like all these things, the creatives and all this stuff.
I want to be part of this.
And it's like, I want to be part of what this is and I'm going to give back to the community. It's like, that's perfect. What if you move here and you try and make it your own and be like, oh, well, this would be better if it was like my small town city in the middle of wherever in America. It's like, why'd you come here then? And it's the same thing with like music culture where I feel like some of these people, the people that are maddest about stuff are the people who like aren't even part of those communities. They're the people who show up somewhere a little bit late to the party, are like, oh, I'm going to make this my identity. And I'm going to freak out because I feel like a lot of people who are like from New York, like genuinely like on the internet are like, the reason why we're mad about transplants is because they're trying to erase New York. And then there's people who've been in New York for like 3 years and they're like, I'm mad at transplants because my favorite they're raising the rent and my favorite coffee shop's busy now.
I mean, raising the rent is also a different discussion. But
it's like, like the raising the rent thing is valid, but like that's how cities work and inflation and like all these things, the side effects of these other things. But it's like the things that people who have been here for like 3 to 5 years are mad about are the same things that people who like show up to a scene late and don't really understand the culture are like getting mad about on the internet, at least from from what I've seen, because like you said, it's like you show up to that show and the guys in the mosh pit are still being the guys in the mosh pit. Like, the hardcore community, the hardcore culture is still there because the people who like live and breathe hardcore are just like, I'm not gonna let anybody change this. I fucking love this band. Shut the fuck up.
One thing that also, like, as we were reading about, like, sellout terminology and how it's changed over the decades, I was thinking that, so, like, a lot of it, it's like, if you think of, like, the idea of selling out is going commercial, it's getting money in trade for something. And I think that's where the caveat with a lot of this comes into. It's like, oh, you're selling your soul, you're selling out your art, or, like, if you're politically active, suddenly you're quiet. I think that's, like, the genuine concern and issue about
It's valid.
But now people are using it as a blanket term when that's not what's happening. But I was thinking in terms of, like, politics and, like, this idea that, like, if you go commercial, your voice will be quieted. And it's like, okay, number one, we have so many artists. Even I'm thinking of like genuine pop stars who are using their voice to be politically active. We just on our last episode, we just talked about Glastonbury and, like, a lot of the artists who are speaking out for, like, Free Palestine and everything. But I was thinking about Rage Against the Machine, and I was like, did Rage Against the Machine get sellout accusations? Like, to this day, they are so outspoken. And, like, you see festival performances, they're still saying stuff. Pomerello is always saying stuff. And yes, they did get sellout accusations because they signed to either Sony or, like, a subsidiary under Sony, and they started doing, the other thing was that they started doing arena tours, so it was, like, bigger ticket price, etc. And I'm like, that is crazy to me, because they've always, to their core, been the same band. They've always had the same message. And you're going to say they're a sellout? Like, on what grounds? On what grounds?
No, it's like that kind of stuff is just so interesting, because I feel like the more culture that surrounds a band, the more likelihood that there is that people are going to be like, you're selling out the second that, like, people that don't look like them or whatever are showing up somewhere.
I think this goes back to what we were saying about Bob Dylan, of, like, people have cultivated a community. And I think it's honestly, like, some of it is out of fear of their community not being the same. And, like, not being a protected, safe space that they built to begin with.
Which, like, I understand all of it, because, again, it's like, I've been one of those people. Like, I've been just like, ew, why are these, like, girls that bully me listening to Fall Out Boy right now? Like, what is this? Like, this isn't for you. I found this because you ostracized me and I needed to find similar people to me. And so, like, I understand the thought process because I've lived it personally. But it was like this thing where I was like, but now I get to see Fall Out Boy more. And now my parents are, like, letting me go in a mosh pit at a Fall Out Boy concert because they're, like, less anxious about me going to, like, this tiny venue, and now I can go see them at, like, this bigger venue that they feel more safe with me going to, and things like that. And so it's like the win to lose ratio was, like, pretty even.
And I think it's also, like, as bands become bigger, because I don't even think, like, I think the issue is them hitting mass audience and them becoming bigger, not whatever, like, clearly selling out doesn't really even have a meaning at this point. But it's like, when you hit a mass audience, you're concerned about, like, the culture and the community that you've cultivated in this safe space not being the same anymore. But then there's always younger bands who come up who that restarts. It's like, if that's genuinely what you want, there's always ways to seek it out, and there's always ways to have that same community. And yes, it changes and it ebbs and flows and it looks different over different years. But at the core, it's still going to be the same. And so it's like, yes, while Fall Out Boy isn't going to be this tiny band anymore, there's going to be a new tiny band who has the same ideology, who's inspired by Fall Out Boy, who's continuing that culture, that community.
Which like, I found. And so it's like, you get those things, but it's like, again, also, it's like, it's easier to find those spaces now with the way the internet is than it was back then. And so, again, it's that thing where, like, now when people are saying things about being a sellout, whatever, I'm like, you could take 10 minutes on Google or, like, a TikTok search and find your replacement tiny band. Like, if you really cared this much about losing whatever you think you're going to be losing. But I just thought it was interesting, too, because also, like, yes. So, like, this is another thing that I was thinking about. It's like, Turnstile's gotten really big. But to me, it's like, Turnstile's never going to get played on Z100. Like, they're, like, you know what I mean? It's like, they're not going to be played on, like, the general public radio, whatever. And so it made me think, because it's like, Halsey's a pop star. I get it. I understand. But when Halsey first started, like, their career, very, very early on, they played at, like, pretty early on, they played at Madison Square Garden and she sold it out. And I just remember the conversation at work was, I was, like, really, because at the time, like, I worked also at, like, a celebrity gossip news site, whatever. And it's like, people were aware of Halsey because of people she dated, whatever. But everybody was like, why is she playing Madison Square Garden? Like, that makes no sense. Like, I don't get it. Like, whatever. And it's like, she is, maybe at that point, she was niche famous, but she was niche famous enough to sell out Madison Square Garden. And it's the same thing with Turnstile. And it's the same thing with Turnstile. It's the same thing with this. So I was just like interested to be like, oh, like, because when we say a lot of the artists that we're talking about right now, it's like Nirvana became very like for the general public. Fall Out Boy became for the very, very general public. Green Day became very for the general public. Whereas like Turnstile is never going to get to that point where they're going to be for people who like listen to Chappell Roan only kind of music.
Yeah.
And so like while we can compare all these things, I was like, there has to be something else. And so looking into other hardcore bands of like who else has been like accused of this, Black Flag was really interesting because they had music in like commercials or something. Yeah, in commercials, and people were getting mad at them because their music was being used in commercials. And the singer Henry Rollins of Black Flag has been super outspoken about how Selling Out is like not fucking real. And it's like, it's really, really funny to me because I found this like one article that basically it was like there was a video interview of Henry with like a young guy from 1984 that like will randomly resurface on the internet every now and again, and then somebody gets it taken down and then it resurfaces again and there's a conversation. And it's basically like this kid is not accusing him of being a sellout, but Henry took it as him being accused of being a sellout, and so he's like fighting this kid. But what this author of this article, Alex Burrows, wrote is that he was like, in the mid 80s, Black Flag are being accused by all in the scene of selling out. And then it's like, oh, like, what could they have possibly done to make people so upset? Signed to EMI, started traveling separately in luxury buses, demanded separate hotel suites with caviar and champagne on their rider. No, reader. They had evolved their sound. They have decided that they can improve on the generic hardcore in which punk rock had been mired with since the late 70s, but the scene punks didn't take kindly to 1984's My War with its Jimmy riffs and pioneering grunge sludge sound. So Black Flag had changed, and the punks hate change. And I thought that this was so interesting because he also wrote that more recently My War had been reappraised with the benefit of contemporary hindsight by actual grown-ups, and it's now commonly considered it's now considered Black Flag's masterpiece. But in 1984, the punk Puritans dismissed it as indulgent metal nonsense, which therefore qualified it as selling out.
Well, it's also like they were ahead of their time. Like, in hindsight, they were ahead of their time.
Like you said, like with Charlie XCX and like all that thing with like Laura Snapes being like, here's a public apology. And Charlie's like, what the fuck is the point of critics if you're gonna apologize to me? But it was just really interesting, like seeing this like tongue-in-cheek take in like a blog site.
In this write-up, like the pioneering grunge sludge sound, it's like in artists pushing the boundaries of what a genre can be, it births new genres, and then it births new bands who were inspired by that, who are making that type of music. And that is crazy.
And again, it's like, okay, like punks are gonna be mad because you're changing your sound, whatever, but there's literally like this YouTube video that's basically Henry Rollins giving a PSA about selling out, and it was just like the funniest thing. Because then reading these articles with Turnstile, like Brendan says a lot of similar things, and it's not him quoting Henry Rollins, it's just him being like, oh, I don't read bad comments because what the fuck do they know about me kind of vibes. And so like it's this thing where like he's like, I got letters from people expressing their outrage that they heard like music from the Stooges or the Ramones or the Buzzcocks like in an ad, and I understand the anger and sense of loss as they figure yet another one of their well-kept secrets has just become part of the corporate structure, and the band is nothing more than the lapdogs of the man, the very man that they were supposed to be sticking it to in every waking moment. But he's like, these bands are not being co-opted or selling out at all. Selling out is when you make the record you're told to make instead of the one you want to make.
True.
And I feel like that is like the point of this whole conversation, is it's like Turnstile have been from the beginning inspired by so much music outside of hardcore, but hardcore is where they went and where they found community and a safe space to like make their music and all this stuff. But they were like, there was always the goal of expanding. There was always the goal of pushing the boundaries. And I think that that's what's so interesting about them and why so many people have gravitated to them and continue to gravitate towards them, because it's like, what's so bad about a band making a genre of music more accessible that then people can go find other artists and be like,
the door,
they're literally a gateway drug.
No, quite literally.
And so it's just like so crazy to me that it's like you literally see guys complaining where it's like, oh, there's like not enough hot girls at the hardcore shows. Like, where's my girlfriend who's gonna like go to the mosh? It's like they're at
You
the.
gatekept them.
It's like you gatekept them, and then you got mad when they like Turnstile, and therefore started listening to like the other music in this genre. And you're like, oh, she's a poser. She doesn't know what she's talking about. And it's like, shut up. Like, you can't have your cake and eat it too, and also throw it out. Like, you can't do that. Like, it's not possible.
So going back to the Henry Rollins thing, it's really interesting when he was like, selling out is being told to make a certain record instead of making the record you want to make.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because all of the press around this album cycle for Turnstile is very much like they had the time to make the record they wanted to make.
Yeah.
They had money to make the record they wanted to make because of the success that the fans have brought them.
Yeah.
So it's like, number one, that's crazy. But as we were reading interviews, I pulled this interview from 2024. So it was like a year and a half before like Turnstile or even doing press cycle, because I was interested to see like what the singer like Brendan Yates was saying like outside of album cycle.
Yeah.
And this is pretty interesting because he says in like hardcore about, he's talking about like being in hardcore and having ambition. He says you're simultaneously supposed to not care about it, but also you better be passionate about it and make it your entire life. So how do you find that balance? If you truly live something, how do you not have ambition or care about it or want to bring it to the world? And then they go on to talk about like the lyrics in the song like Pressure to Succeed, which quite literally is about this topic. They talk about on the first 7-inch they did, the first song is Death Grip, and the interviewer is saying that this is basically like a jilted lover song, right? And he's saying like, I don't know if I've ever seen a hardcore band like make a song like this. And Brendan was saying, yeah, I was trying to figure out how to sing about something that I felt was a little more personal and less guarded. And so it's like from the get-go, like from the original music, he's already trying to approach this in like a little bit different way than what he grew up listening to. And then he goes on to say, I think fortunately for me, after a few years of getting into hardcore, I realized it's cool to be yourself and you don't necessarily have to be hard. And then he goes on in saying, when Turnstile formed, he felt a sense of younger and older generations telling him things like, that's not a hardcore band. Like, they're not singing like this. Like, they're wearing colors instead of wearing black.
Yeah.
He says, but I think the comfort you get is when you realize that you can define the world around you how you want to define it. And you don't have to necessarily shape your own world into anyone else's definitions. Like, what?
Yeah.
I almost forgot this is the entire point. I almost forgot we have free will.
Yeah.
I almost forgot as an artist with
like
self-expression, we can choose the world that we live in. Like,
it's just like, it's so interesting to me, like as a person who like, there were like a couple years of my life where I would go and photograph mainly like screamo music because that was like the Warped Tour World's version of hardcore, because I loved the way that the music sounded. But I fucking hated the screaming. I was like, I hate this so much. I don't know what's happening here. 90% of the time it was like a Christian band, which also made no sense because I'm like, that sounds like a devil's inside of you. Like, this is crazy. But like, there was always also like, to juxtapose that, a singer, and the lyrics of the songs always had like really deep, meaningful, like there was so much going on in the song when you like really sat and listened. Like, when I think of like Under Oath was genuinely like a Christian screamo band, which is so funny to me. But it's funny how Brendan's like talking about this of like, or like the interviewer's just like, oh yeah, like I don't hear hardcore songs with like lyricism like this or whatever. And it's like, that's why people gravitate.
He was like, that was always the point.
Yeah, it's like the point is to like tell a story through both the music and the lyrics. And I think that that's why, like, as I got older and became more aware of Turnstile stuff, it's like Glow On was the first album that I listened to by them, like really. And so it's like, but at that point it was also poppier from my perspective. But it's like, none of this is pop. But it's like when they're talking about it in comparison, but it's like when they're talking about it, it's like more so because the reason why I never was like, oh, this is not for me is because he's more so like rapping in like the early days than like screaming.
Yeah.
And so that felt more accessible to me. And then as time's gone by, it's like, I think because he clearly has an understanding of like songwriting and songwriters and like respects that, it's like he's leaned more into not... I wouldn't dare call Brendan Yates a melodic singer. I feel like he would take offense to that in some sort of way. But there is more of a melodic vibe to the music at large.
Yes, yeah.
Than there had been. And I find that really interesting because of like the way in the Pitchfork interview, they do talk about like their draw to all these other genres of music, which again has been like a theme that we keep calling back to when we've been talking about them throughout this discussion.
It's like fascinating, like in these interviews, but it's like this has always been his mindset. Like it's always been open and something that's like he wants to challenge the notion of like what hardcore is, and also like he's also just like, I'm just being me. I'm just doing Miley. Like I don't know what you guys are talking about. Like I'm just having a fun time.
I can't remember which interview it was that he talked about this in, but he was saying how like the members of Turnstile have all been in other bands together, and that like he was really known as like a drummer, and other ones were known as like a guitarist, and then they like became the bassist, and like Turnstile was all people taking different roles in the band, and how it's like
this is just
he was like, oh, and this is just like the one that works. And I find it so interesting though, where it's like literally like the way that they respected music and cared about it, and were like, we're just gonna like have a million different bands with like 300 different lineups, but like they're all us. And like sometimes other friends, but like mostly just all us. And like we're just gonna see.
Someone does now.
But I think it's just so interesting how he was just like, yeah, like I've never like Brendan was like, I've never taken vocal lessons. Like I don't know really what I'm doing, and that's why like it took a while for me to get to be more of like a singer than like a talker and like all this kind of stuff. But it's like clearly they have always just had this like almost like scholarly respect for music. And I think that that's what's so beautiful and cool about them as a band. And it's interesting to see as so-called fans of theirs that are getting so mad at them about like selling out, being so mad about it, because it's like, in what way do you digest music that you know nothing about these artists that you claim to love so much that you're not just like, oh my god, they're doing everything they've ever hoped and dreamed about? Because in the Pitchfork interview, they're talking about how they used to like have to record albums in like 5 days because they had $500 and that's all they had for the studio. And now they have time to like go rent the house that like one of their favorite bands like recorded in, and they're like, okay, well now we have like the studio space in this house, and we have like the living room, and we can like sit in the living room as a band for like a month and like work on this and figure out like all the different styles of music we want to bring in. And it's like they're living their literal dream, and people are just like, oh, you fucking sellouts. And it's like, what? Have you never like who like I can't name a single music fan that I'm friends with that has never read like a single interview that their favorite artist has done. And it's like
and that's why it's kind of like we were talking about the transplant conversation. It's like it's probably the people who've been around for like 3 years who liked one specific album who are mad. So in this Pitchfork interview, this is like I think the second interview that came out like around this album cycle. The first one was with New York Times, but to me this Pitchfork one, the journalist was Lawrence Burney. Fascinating conversation about their history and where they've been as a band. And really this came out a month before, or this came out this came out before the album actually dropped. So it's like they were already anticipating that this was gonna be a topic of like, the music changing.
Well, I think also part of why the conversation was so good is that Lawrence is also from Baltimore. So it's like there is that background there where it's like they connected on this level where it didn't sound so much that he was like as in the hardcore scene as them, but he like dabbled in it and understood it. And so it's like that thing of like, not only do you understand hardcore, but you understand specifically Baltimore where we came from and where we came from. And I think that also
for sure
helped a lot with the discussion.
Why we say that like certain journalists based on their backgrounds should interview certain artists, and like we don't need white men interviewing literally everyone like great pops. And it's like,
well, that's why it's like, oh, like Brady Spanos's Addison Rae cover story is gonna be like, it's like Rob Sheffield's great at talking to pop girls, but it's like Britney Spanos' one is always going to be better because it's a girl like pop music, like, you know,
I'll die on. But so to give some context, like if you're listening, if you're new to Turnstile, and like Sarah already said, like listening through the history of their albums, like they've always been doing stuff. And so some of this was contextualized in the Pitchfork interview. They said Space and Time was their first album with the rock and metal label Roadrunner. It was their introduction to the mainstream. So that was right before Glow On.
Well, that album is really interesting because I literally was listening to one of the songs in there and I was like, this kind of sounds like a Steve Miller Band song, but like if it was hardcore. And I was listening to it and then I can't remember which song it was, so sorry. If you really want to know, like I'll go through the album, hit me up, like whatever. But I like heard it and I was like, this sounds like the Steve Miller Band. And I went and I found the Steve Miller song that it reminded me of. And I was like, oh, like these guitar parts are really similar, but it's as if a hardcore person took it and made it hardcore.
Crazy.
And so it was just really interesting because it's definitely not like an interpolation or anything like that. Yeah, 100%. But it was just that thing where it's like, it's not close enough where you'd be like, oh, like they stole this, but it's just like Steve Miller Band's a band that I grew up listening to. And so I was like, oh, it's like the same vibe or whatever, same energy. And I was like, oh yeah, like this does really feel like this. This wasn't just like a fluke thing, but it's like reading this interview and reading about them. It's like, that's their goal, is to just be like, oh, like I listened to this record, I'm gonna put this in here, or like, oh, I grew up on this, oh, whatever. And they're like, we're gonna expand on what hardcore can be and what it means.
So some of the specifics like on that record were some interludes felt more like mellow elevator music. One of Lauryn Hill's backup singers contributed an unexpected R&B detour on the song Bomb. Diplo also added some production to the song Right to Be. And so the journalist is saying if time and space was divisive for hardcore pursuits, then Glow On was a line in the sand. With every album Turnstile have released over the last decade, someone takes issue with how much they color outside of hardcore's lines. But at this point, they've already gotten so used to dealing with detractors. And then they make this funny analogy, like, it's like aging millennials scoffing at the NBA stars of today, and then proceed with an analogy that means nothing to me.
He follows this up with a quote from Yates where it's like, I wouldn't say I'm bothered by it, but it's something I feel like I can't subscribe to, because everyone has a different idea of what they want, how they define a certain culture or genre. But to me, growing up going to hardcore shows, it's hard to just subscribe to that dialogue, only because I think it's something that is not defined by the sonics of it. It's more grounded in community. And then Lawrence, the journalist, goes on to say, the bigger Turnstile get, the more that fans will try to chip away at their armor. Maybe if, having signed to a division of Warner Music Group and amassing unlikely fame, they would have picked up and moved to New York or Los Angeles, these critics would have had more of an effect on the band. But as we've been saying, it's like they're so rooted in the community of Baltimore hardcore, and it's like they're not, like, literally nothing about them is giving, oh, we've sold out, oh, like we need to live in New York, we need to do this. But it's like how we talked, well, this hasn't come out yet, but when we talk to Monoblock, and you guys will see when we interview them, we talked to them about how they were based in Philly, but based off of the type of music that's big in Philly, the type of music that they wanted to make made more sense to do in New York. Yeah. Because of what they wanted to do. Whereas with Turnstile, them making hardcore music so rooted in like Baltimore's culture and like the culture of music that exists there, even outside of hardcore, it's like it made sense to them to stay there, because it's like, what else are they gonna do? Like, they need to be in Baltimore to make the best possible version of their music.
So I think it's interesting in the conversation of like, yes, in this Pitchfork article they said like when they started out in the beginning, it was like they had 4 days to record an album, they only had $500, and like now with them having the time to be able to sit and like make something they truly wanted to make with Never Enough, especially following up Glow On. A lot of the like also feedback that we've heard in terms of them selling out is they're not hardcore anymore, because this album is a lot more ambient and a lot more melodic, and there's a lot going on. But in reading this Pitchfork article, it's fascinating because they were like, that was the whole point.
It was always the point. They always wanted to get there.
And so Yates says there's a kind of outro on Never Enough that's probably obnoxiously long to a listener that maybe just wants to get in and out. But for us, it was very intentional. It really felt important to sit in that moment, and the amount of space you take up is equally as important as the space that you sit back on. And then he revisits this concept again later, and Lawrence writes, in reality, Never Enough doesn't depart very far from where Glow On left off, at least in its general sound palette. But you do get the sense that they, at some point in the process of becoming the biggest thing in hardcore over the past 4 years, had gotten to a place where shit was becoming too loud, too demanding, too routine, and a feasible way to disrupt that energy was to begin manipulating time. And then Yates says again, there's maybe a psychological reason why there might be some bits of kind of desire for a certain stillness around these chaotic bits. Something about it feels important to breathe for a second amongst that. And Lawrence writes, it's not that the chaotic moments are absent in Never Enough, but there's a sense that they're all collectively learning something, that one must also revel in those moments of calm to keep a sound mind. And then they talked about, like, they have another song that's like nearly 7 minutes long, and they talked about making it shorter, and then they're like, no, fuck it, like, we want, because there was discussion about like, oh, is this going to be like a skip song for people on the album? And it's like, no, they wanted to make the record they wanted to make, and they stuck to it. And the whole point, like, after reading this, it was like the whole point was to give space and expansiveness to hardcore, where it's like hardcore, like, life isn't just one thing. Life isn't just hardcore. Life isn't just these heavy moments. And they wanted to make an album that was like living and breathing. And like having the ebbs and flows. And I will say, like after having heard the album and seeing their stage performance, it'll be interesting to see what they do for like the rest of the tour, because I don't know if it'll be the same like setup, formatting, like song structure.
I wonder as the movie that they did.
Same as Under the K Bridge, but the like they literally had like an intro. They basically had a halftime that was like one of those songs that has like the really long, just like melodic, and you're like, and it was low-key this dance break, and everyone, and they all left the stage, and this wasn't even the encore. This was like halfway through, and it was like that. It's like the synth, and it's like, I don't know. Everyone's like, and we were all just having like a ooh, and everyone was having a good time. The energy, the vibes were so high. Yeah. And then it was like same. They came back and they did like I wouldn't say it was encore because they did like 5 or 6 songs still, and then did like another outro like that, where it was like everyone was just like, oh my god, like what just happened? And it's like because it was able to like have these breathing moments where it changes the dynamic so much, and you're like, what is going on right now? That it was such a beautiful moment.
This point that you're saying of like, oh, like all of the songs kind of like flowed together and like all of this stuff, and like thinking about the record and them being like, oh, it was like 7 minutes and we were worried and whatever. It makes me think about the conversation that we had about Brat, that we had about Sabrina Carpenter, and like her album cycle being so short and all this stuff, where it's like, I personally am such like I love when I can listen to an album beginning to end and it feels like I'm listening to a story. That it feels like everything is cohesive and that it makes sense. And it's like, I understand the point of albums that don't do that. Like, I get it. It's like, that's not for everybody, whatever. But I think what I love so much about this Turnstile record is that I can put it on and my Spotify is always automatically set to like repeat all, and it will just start back over and I won't have realized because it's so cohesive. And it's just this thing where it's like, this is just so clearly a story. And then when it starts in the beginning again, it's like, yeah, I can tell it's the beginning because you can tell it's the beginning of a story. But at the same time, it's just like everything just flows so well that I'm like, this is the only way to listen to this record. Yeah. It's like, if like literally it feels like stopping it in the middle of it is sacrilegious, and I will get sent straight to hell for doing that. Like, it's like, you're like,
I arrived to my destination, but I don't want to go around the block like 10 more times because I haven't finished that.
Yeah, like I haven't finished the whole record yet. But it does, like, it feels like there was a goal and a point. And I think that is so interesting, again, from spending the past 2 weeks literally just listening to so much Turnstile.
And people have also said that the album makes a lot of sense with the film that they did. So they basically turned the whole thing into like a movie, and various portions of it have come out as individual music videos. Yeah. But for the people who went and saw it in theaters, they were like, whoa, like it was meant to be viewed this way.
Yeah. Which I think is so cool, and it's such an interesting way to like
they can't
music,
have the resources to do that when they're have 4 days and $500.
Yes, exactly. And so it's like, oh no, they sold out. But it's like, now we get more art. Now we get to digest more things. And it's like, what's so bad about having more art, having more access to things? And it's the point that I made earlier on, where it's like, these people don't care about the band. They are like, that's my thing, where it's like, the people who care are accepting it.
There to listen to.
Yeah, it's like it's
art.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because it's like what your experience that you told me that you had like at that Turnstile show, and like watching all the videos from the free show in Baltimore and all of this. Again, it's like, it's so much about what this band has cultivated. It's like, yeah, like the hardcore community is a thing, but it's like what specifically Turnstile have cultivated and done. And like the music means so much to these people in the same way to us, like the 1975 does, or whatever band that we really love. And so it's like the people who aren't online and complaining, the people where it's like, I'm seeing these videos of like guys being like, okay, you don't like Turnstile,
like 5 angry people.
It's like, fight me when I like
10
when
people at the show.
Me and my hardcore bros like make like a choreographed dance to birds, like that kind of thing. Yeah. And it's like, okay, like these guys are fucking with it because they know the band and they get their point of view and they get what they're doing and they see the vision. And it's like, that's the whole point, is that there is a vision, that there is a story, that music is art. And I feel like people forget that and it gets lost. Yeah. And that fucking sucks, because that's
the last thought. And I think this is like such a perfect thing to end on. I laughed out loud when I read this. Brendan Yates also talked to LA Times, and this came out in June. And so the journalist Michael Wood asked, for every fan of Turnstile, you've got someone accusing you of ruining hardcore. Have you ever heard a critique that actually stung? And he goes, I have no interest in any dialogue about anyone's opinions about anything that I'm doing. And then he says, I appreciate the definitiveness of that. And he says, it just doesn't matter. Other people's opinions just doesn't matter. And I think that is like one of the crazy, as an artist. Yeah. As an artist,
but that's like
your art. Yeah. As like people who are like, oh, this isn't hardcore. They don't get it. Conceptualize. Yeah. They can never conceptualize this. Yeah. Same with like Brat. Like, that truly has to come from an artist who's in their lane, who knows their shit,
Well, it's
who's
like
doing their art. Like,
Carly, like a day ago, or maybe today, I don't know, like a day recording, whatever, like she tweeted something that was like kind of like introspective about like Brat and like her music or whatever, and somebody like retweeted it and was just like, what depth do you think your album has, or something along those lines, like trying to bait her. And then all these people were, this is literally a record about like somebody who's like in their early 30s experiencing like the fears of never being pregnant and like wanting to be pregnant and like wanting to like have a family and like wanting to have a life, but also wanting to have a career and like all of these things and like wanting to like have fun and like be a real person. It's like all these things, and it's like, how do you listen to this record and not get that and not see these themes? And it's like, because people are choosing to be tone deaf. They're choosing to just be like, I just want to experience XYZ thing because this music is supposed to fit into this bubble. And it's like, when do we forget that music is art? And that's the thing that I find so interesting. And that's what I find so interesting about this sellout conversation at large, and like thinking about like these other bands like Green Day and Black Flag and like whoever, like getting like the artists just being like, we're gonna keep doing what we're doing because we're gonna spread the message. And now turns it's like,
and I'm minding my business. Anyways, I just love that he was like, no one's opinions matter. Like, I do not care.
Like, guys,
don't
even compliment him. Don't even compliment that band. Don't even give him
I went to the Grammys and like one. But he's just like,
it's really funny.
It doesn't really matter. I want to see that.
But I love that kind of energy. Like, so much.
The Grammys next year.
That'd be so cool.
Wait.
But yeah, I just feel like it's an energy that we fuck with. Like very, very strongly.
And this conversation, I'm even more definitively pro Turnstile, and I'm ready to take down any man who has something to say.
No, literally, I'm just like, what's so bad about any of these things? Like, all of these things sound really good to me, but I don't know. I mean, I feel like this is a topic that a lot of you guys have opinions about, so I would love to hear those, because I feel like we've had like some similar conversations like throughout our time of making this podcast about like selling out and like losing your favorite artist and like all these types of things. And so I feel like it would just be really, really cool to like get everybody's perspective on this. So if you do have any feelings, we do have the Substack chat that you can go talk to us in. Or also, as per usual, if you are mad at either of us, or are also just like, wow, I'm so obsessed with your thought. Or if you want me to search what song sounded like a Steve Miller Band song, I can also do that for you. You can slide in our DMs. I'm at Sarah_Fagan, and Jenna is at Jenna_million. So with all of that, thanks for listening to this episode of Name 3 Songs. Until next time, never let anyone make you feel bad about your favorite band.
And remember, you're never too cool to listen to Turnstile.
Don't forget to subscribe to be notified when new episodes come out, and leave us a 5-star review wherever you are listening, because they really help.
If you want to find out more about any of the sources we referenced in this episode, you can visit name3songs.substack.com.